Delighted to be joined this afternoon by David Lipsey, Lord David Lipsey. And before I go much further, David, I'd like to welcome you. I think it's been quite a while since we last spoke.
Yes, it may even go back to the BGRB days when I was chair of the BGRB, though, of course, I had a subsequent phase in Greyhound Racing when the then Minister Tracy Crouch asked me to try and sort out a deal between the bookmakers and the sport, which fortunately we were able to achieve. But all those years have gone by in the meantime.
Okay, it's on that basis that I wanted to put together just a very brief history, because you would be too modest to want to discuss this on your own. So I'll just kick off. I checked back through our records, and I think the first record I have was when Zac was Westminster Dog of the Year, your I believe Wimbledon ex-racer. We then, at that stage, you were really quite critical of the Greyhound Board, and I found a lovely quote here. In 2001, an unaccountable, self-regulating oligarchy, I think was how you described it. What was particularly significant was that within 6 months, the Greyhound Board's retired Greyhound contribution more than doubled from 225,000 to 500,000.
Yep.
You were appointed beginning of 2004. I think within 3 months, you'd reached a deal with the bookmakers to increase their voluntary contribution from 0.2 to 0.6%. I believe, if I remember correctly, you were the chairman when the contribution to the Retired Greyhound Trust reached £1 million for the first time. I think, again, that happened very, very quickly. You were obviously chairman through the difficult times, particularly notably CM, and then in the lead up to the breakup of the British Greyhound Board, and followed by the Greyhound Board of Great Britain, which I know you were actively involved in. There are so many things to sort of ask you about. If I said, looking back now, during your time as, I think, full 5 years as chairman, what would you describe as your greatest achievement?
Well, the most important achievement in the long run, undoubtedly, was bringing the BGRB together with the NGRC, as it was then called. In those days, you had a kind of lobby group for the sport in the BGRB, and you had the regulation in the NGRC. This is a form of division of responsibilities that hardly exists in the modern world. If you look at it, the BHA does both. And it was clearly a completely ineffective operation, especially since the NGRC was some leftover body from years before that had owed nothing to democracy or accountability or anything else. It had to be got rid of. What we did was we asked Lord Donoghue, a colleague of mine in the Lords, to do an inquiry. You remember Patrick Nixon, who acted as his sort of secretary. He produced a wonderful report advocating the amalgamation of the two bodies. And that is why we're in a position to do anything today. I know GBGB has its critics, but if we'd had no GBGB, we would have had no Greyhound Racing by then. The other thing that I think was a major achievement, not by me, but by many people, was the complete change in rehoming. I mean, when I came to the BGRB, only fewer than 1 dog in 6, when they retired, were being rehomed. Today, the figure is 94%. Now, you mentioned CM, Floyd. CM was ghastly. Story in the Sunday Times saying 10,000 or 15,000 greyhounds were being massacred on very little basis. But being an old politician, I'm afraid I didn't explode with rage, because I could see that the arrival of this story was going to carry the greyhound industry forward. It was then clear, once that story had appeared, we had to do something about welfare, otherwise the politicians would abolish us. So the Sunday Times and CM in the end did us a favor and has been the basis for the enormous improvements in welfare that we've seen since.
Yeah, very, very much so. I was going to suggest exactly that. I mean, looking at the rehoming schemes, there's also been a lot of work done in an attempt to reduce injuries. And I frequently, with particularly in the last month, have been banging the drum to say, you know, we almost seem to have forgotten our history. During your time as chairman of the British Greyhound Board, there was an enormous sum of money spent on research, very, very good research into sands, surfaces, banking, canvas, you name it, it was done. And it appears that we've it's been lost in the mists of time. And what was your recollection of the investment the industry made in that particular area at that stage?
Well, you're quite right. It was a big investment off a smaller budget than we now have. And also it was an investment in time. I remember John Haynes, an old friend of mine who was a greyhound trainer, going around the tracks one by one, advising them on how to improve their surfaces. And I've no doubt at all that the diminished injury rate for greyhounds stems from that work, though it's still got further to do and further research on how to make our tracks even safer.
Yes, of course. Going back again, you were, as I said, I believe Bernard Donahue and you are quite long acquainted, good friends, and I know you had quite a significant input into the setting up of the Greyhound Board of Great Britain. I don't think it turned out in the end, as I'm sure as a politician, it's something that you would have anticipated more than the rest of us. But it probably didn't turn out precisely as you wanted it in terms of the structure and the power base, etc. Looking back, is there anything that you feel that the industry should have done that it didn't do?
I don't think I'm in a position to comment on that, Floyd. I mean, I had the phase I was chair of the BGRB, which you pointed at. I then left the sport for various reasons. I got involved again when Crazy Trouch asked me to get some more money for it and did that. I then left the sport until, to my complete astonishment, the CEO of ARC, Mark Cruddas, came to see me in the House of Lords recently and said, we need someone to help us get our new PGR up to the mark on welfare. Would you be willing to join with that in mind? And of course I said yes.
Okay, you bring it on to the subject of Premier Greyhound Racing. You are chairman. What is your role and how will you expect it to develop over the next, well, certainly the next 18 months or so?
Well, we have the aim of Premier Greyhound Racing is to have a single stream of greyhound racing going into betting shops, people's homes, perhaps some form of broadcasting, if it's still called that these days, and to market that, to earn an income from that. Earning an income requires two things. It requires that it be absolutely out in front on welfare, because you won't get people betting on dogs if they think it's a cruel sport. And then the other thing is, if we get money from increasing the betting interest in greyhounds, that will be money, some of which we can allocate to direct support for welfare, as it's being done at the moment by GBGB and by our own tracks. So we are trying to build a much more healthy greyhound racing, because it will be a much healthier greyhound racing for welfare.
Yes, of course. Would there be anything specific that you have in mind in terms of anything that you would plan to do, or are we talking a more general, just sort of financial support for whatever initiatives are created?
Well, I think we have got some ideas of our own, which we haven't bottomed out yet, so I'm not ready to share them. Equally, I think most of us anyway, most of my board were very impressed by the GBGB's welfare document that they produced recently, comprehensive, science-based, practical. That will require monetary support, and I think we're very aware of that.
So, David, going back to the story of Zac, is that related to your original involvement with greyhounds?
Well, sort of. In 1977, I was working for a man called Anthony Crossland, who was an environment secretary, who stood for leader of the Labour Party. Well, on the first ballot, I think he got 16 votes. So I was absolutely distraught. I thought, where can I go where I can be absolutely certain not to meet anyone I know? I know Great Wimbledon Greyhound Track. So I went to Wimbledon Greyhound track, and believe it or not, there walking down the stairs towards me was a nice man called Matthew Oakeshott, who was in a similar position with Roy Jenkins, who'd also been humiliated in the first round. Now, Matthew knew a bit more about greyhound racing. He introduced me to Dave Richardson, who was a long-standing bookmaker there. We bought a dog who was within 2 spots of the track record, indeed, good dog. And then he broke a hock. I was told by the trainer that he had been rehomed. And only about 10 or 20 years later, I realized I hadn't ever checked up that he was rehomed. And that's what got me into greyhound welfare. So Zac went in for Greyhound Dog of the Year. We went up to Crufts together. I got involved in the Retired Greyhound Trust, as it then was. And the story never stopped.